And we're back, part two. Y'all know how I do. Anyway, so we see why he has like this fervor and drive to constantly succeed. Not to mention that, of course, at that point in time, remember this is a time period piece of the 70s, bleeding into the 80s, and we had gone post sexual revolution, and but yet the successful men, let's just be honest, who are at the top tier of success were like people like Hugh Hefner. So him, showman, now Steve, trying to want more in life and didn't want to necessarily pursue his family business, the family business of printing. I believe it was just like calendar printing of some sort back in India. And when he moves to the United States, he works for a length of time in gasoline stations and saves his money. It saves nearly every nickel and dime, and doesn't have much of a social life. So of course he's able to retain it so that he can follow in the footsteps of his idol of Hugh Hefner, and for some reason wanted always the concept of high class, which I will say that was not the route to follow, especially then. This is what I will say. I'm sure, what's the word? On the surface level, everything looked posh and something that people would want to aspire to. But when I will recommend that if you watch this show, also watch. There's also a documentary based on the series. I think the series took a lot more creative license, but the true life story, I believe, is called The Secrets of Chippendales, or The Secrets of the Chippendale Murders, streaming on Hulu. But there's also, which I will say to follow up with, Secrets of Playboy. And I think it was maybe like an 8-part series, I'm not sure, but that's a docu-series. Like, it's based on, people's experiences at the Playboy Mansion and Playboy experience of every sort, from the Playboy Club to the magazine to the mansion to being a bunny, finding out all the nooks and crannies, and also all of the male toxicity that came of that time frame, which was swept a lot under the rug. But which it pains me to know that this is the person that people were esteeming, especially people who were like new to this country and were like, I would love to be like him. He didn't necessarily want to exploit women, but definitely wanted a sense of class that you would see like in his magazines, and especially the celebrity that it would attract. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., all of that, the Rat Pack, people that were truly famous in that time frame. So he wanted to emulate him the best way he could, and opens a backgammon club because he would see it advertised always in the magazines. But then he realizes that doesn't sell. That's not alluring enough. But funny how sometimes maybe it's the law of attraction, and you kind of put it out in the universe, that he comes across two individuals who happen to pop into his club. And this is what we see in the first episode, just the first episode. We see the likes of Paul Snider and his then wife, Dorothy Stratton, played brilliantly here by Dan Stevens and Nicola Peltz. And they do a brilliant job because, he promotes himself as, kind of like a sly, slimy kind of dude, which wasn't far off from the truth, sorry to say, and is able to convince Banerjee that he's a club promoter. And of course, his Playboy bunny wife, it's going to bring in all the celebrities, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen with the backgammon concept. Banerjee's so desperate that he wants he wanted success. He had been open for 4 months and he had been in a slump. And of course, knowing these people, it's gonna draw in all those celebrities. But he like knew them on a surface level. He didn't know them. So he promises more than he can really produce, knowing that Banerjee gave him like a huge stake into the company because he couldn't afford to actually pay him a salary. But then when he finds out he's a fake and a fraud, then he lowers it to like about 5%. And we see a man like go through insecurities in a downward spiral and hating life because he wasn't accomplished of his own, was kind of piggybacking off of his wife's success of course being a Playboy playmate, and she was well liked and really well revered, almost to the point where she was getting along with her career and maybe even like branching out into acting. But they make nod to them because of Stratton, who was a beautiful woman, introduced the concept of the collars because it was synonymously known. And you wouldn't do this now. I think that they could have easily been sued today because it was known for the Playboy Bunny look. If you were in the Playboy Bunny club, all the waitresses, aside from that beautiful corset kind of uniform, which was incredibly hard to wear. That's why I suggest for you to watch that documentary, just to let you know how incredibly binding it was to the lungs. But the collar part was really cute, and so they were the ones that would introduce that costume. So when you would go to the club as a woman and you wanted to watch the dancers, you would see the cute little ties and the collar and the little cuffs, so. But unfortunately, their time there was short-lived because the man was incredibly obsessive and possessive and couldn't handle her success and couldn't handle her beauty, and ends up, unfortunately, spoiler alert, killing her in the most of horrendous, heinous ways. And he had issues even with Nick DeNoia, because at least that's how we're led to believe when we're watching the show, because Nick is very out there and very confident about himself, and he happens to just come into the club because he heard rumblings of it, comes with 2 beautiful women and wants to check it out. But at the time, men weren't allowed during the show. Well, actually, it was just the show part. Once they were able to kind of stumble upon this idea, actually, because again, they had nothing until they go to one particular gay club and they realize that it brings attention when there's like a whole burlesque thing kind of going on with one of the dancers. And it wasn't just Steve, though. That's why I say to watch the documentary, because he was amongst other people. And then they came up with the concept like, oh, that would be great. There's no male dancers and that cater just to women. I think we've tapped into something that isn't existent. So we can make bank off of that. And that's where everything kind of comes together. So Nick DeNoia just happens to walk into the club and realizes, he wasn't permitted, and kind of takes insult to it, but hands him his card and says, I was just here on a professional level. I'm a choreographer. And then lights are kind of going off in his head, Steve's head, and he's like, I need to work with this guy somehow. And then makes a meeting, and you could tell, look, this is what I will say. I think that the show takes a lot of creative license, and we are kind of led to believe that Nick is likable. He is. He's very likable. I mean, if you watch the doc, there were a lot of people that felt the kind of way. I feel like it was kind of split. In real life, it was kind of split. You either were for Steve or you were for Nick. But I feel like the show also doesn't hide away from the fact that Nick was a little bit demanding and very particular of certain things, even down to the way he even takes his salad dressing. So, but he did produce one hell of a show. And I feel like if they both Steve and Nick would have had more of a communication amongst creative people and kind of let go a little bit of the ego, I think they would have been alive today, and they probably would have been huge successes. They would have gone into the billions by now. But unfortunately, we're talking about 2 egos that were like clashing at every sense. And I will say that The show really does an exquisite job highlighting how cat and mouse, and you feel like you're watching a game of chess between these two, because they always tried to one up each other. And though there were moments of vulnerability where it seemed like they would kind of get along, something would always happen. Something would always go left, and then they were right back to being enemies. So they were more frenemies than they were anything. But we see that. We also see that that's why I say it was not really a good route to esteem somebody like Hugh Hefner. Although I will say that, his After Dark, I think he used to have like a TV kind of program, Hugh Hefner, and he introduced a lot of black artists of the time and a very integrated crowding. He's still for so and God bless him. I feel like he was just a victim of the time, Steve, because he was aware of how racist. It was the 1980s. It's not like so progressive as it is now, where things like that would be like, no, and you're looking at a straight up lawsuit. But back then, things were kind of like permissible. Although he